So I did a Twitter space with a team, and on that Twitter space, one thing that was said really stood out to me. And I feel like this is a big thing for developers and businesses. So I did this Twitter space with the Stripe team, and the Stripe team said that there's one area that is not oversaturated and that a lot of businesses and developers can take advantage of, and that is the Stripe App Store. Now, I work at a company called This.Labs, and we have built quite a few Stripe apps, and we even own one. And so when the Stripe team said this to me, it really stood out to me because I know we have an app that is successful, but I was really saying, what are we even talking about here? How unsaturated is this? But the reality is, it is very unsaturated. And the core customers that are going to be using these apps are businesses and enterprise level organizations, people that have transactions happening with customers. They need solutions, and the Stripe App Store is kind of a great way to do that. Some of the apps are doing things on the front end that are very front end heavy, and some are doing a lot of information on the back end. They're processing information, maybe sharing it to another location or another tool. But essentially, Stripe has the vision that all apps will be in the dashboard, and businesses can have like one centralized location to use all of their tools. So for example, we have one app in the Stripe App Store that is data mapped by MailChimp, and it's not really doing a lot on the front end because it's taking the processes and transactions and information from customers and passing it to MailChimp so that way you can start reaching out to those customers, emailing them and things like that. But then you have other applications that are doing a lot of stuff front end heavy. So I thought, what better way than to kind of go through this than to actually make a Stripe app, go through the tutorial and discuss this. Now for the setup, you have to install Stripe CLI. The documentation really covers this in a great way. Now the documentation really covers a lot. I'm going to take this from the example of utilizing this in Windows, and we can go from there. If you're using a Mac, you'll be using Homebrew to install everything. But if you're using Windows, you're going to have to do it my way, which is you need to use the command prompt, not git bash, but you need to use command prompt. You basically need to log into Stripe and set up a connection with them through command prompt. Then you can do everything else in git bash. So let's create one from scratch. You need to obviously put it in your environment path and variables so you can kind of get started with Stripe CLI and set all that up there. But you need to have the location of the exe file of wherever you're using Stripe. You need that folder. And so from there, we're going to immediately start out with a Stripe login. And this is, of course, after you've set up Stripe locally. Stripe login. So now saying press enter to open the browser to go here. So we'll press enter and it'll redirect here. And so now it's going to ask you to log in. It's for me, I have two-factor on, so it's going to text me the login number. So I'm typing that in there for this time. And so now it's asking you to verify that it's the right location. And so you see here the pairing code is, and it matches. So we can just go ahead and press allow access. Access is now granted. Right? And so now it's closed that. And so now we need to go back here. I'm leaving that open, and we can verify obviously our Stripe version. So Stripe version, and we can see the version is there. We can upgrade if we wanted to. And then of course you need Node installed for this, obviously. But here we're going to start building a Stripe app API. We'll go ahead and Stripe app plugins, copy and paste that one. So it's installing it. Cool. And then if you need to upgrade, which you probably shouldn't, but if you need to, you can go ahead and do that. And now let's go ahead and just create an app, right? So Stripe apps create, and we'll call this one QR code. And so enter details of this. So the Apple ID, I'm just gonna leave that blank. The display name, I'm gonna change this to QR code, and it's installing everything. Cool. Now we can preview our app. So let's go ahead, hit ls. DRI. And then we can go to cd QR code. And then from here, we can go ahead and now do Stripe apps start to get the entire thing running. I had to run npm install first and then Stripe apps start, and now we're good to go. So press enter to open the Stripe dashboard. And this is going to open everything in a test environment, essentially. So I'm logging in with my account, and now everything is a test environment here. Now, for example, data mapper by MailChimp, it's not really doing a lot on the front end, but if you go to, obviously you could be redirected to your MailChimp, but now you go to settings, now we've got all these options here that are going to pop up. You can see all these options here, all these select things that you could be doing. Obviously, it gets a lot more intensive. So some apps will be front end heavy, some will be back end. But when we start our app and it's brand new, fresh, this is what we see. So a Stripe app is going to show up on this side of the board. You can see here are multiple apps here that you could essentially have. So for example, data exported for Google Drive, you can sign into your Google Drive and have that there. Mercury is another one. So if you have balances, it'll show in if you sign in. And of course, there's a whole store full of applications. But for the one that we're making, you see that we have two views here, home and customer. So that means on the home page or our customers page, our app will currently show. Now, why is that? Well, we can kind of go over that. We're in our stripe-app.json file, and here we have our views, which are the pages that it will load on. So we have our home, our customers, and our customer details. Now, one thing in particular here, we also have a .build file, right? And so with the .build file, we have a manifest.js file, and that will basically build, this is what we end up sending to production, the views that we'll be showing, as well as other things like our content security policy and things like that. So now, obviously, this is all boilerplate text. We'll be replacing all this, but there are certain things when you're building with Stripe that are different than building with, let's say, React. Now, obviously, it's using JavaScript, it's using React and TypeScript and all the good stuff, but there are some things that come from Stripe that you have to use. So for example, here you can see that we're importing a box, context view, a divider, inline, link. So obviously these are UI elements that they build, but the way that they use a context view essentially is this section up here. What is the top layer looking like, right? And then of course a box is essentially their version of a div. And so you need to utilize it like that in order to produce anything within the Stripe app. So what I'm gonna do now is just replace all this boilerplate text, right? So I'm gonna remove the test. I'm just gonna go ahead and delete all these items here. And so I removed everything. Obviously we got a ton of errors because of that, but let's go ahead and start putting in some of our own code. I kind of already know some of the things that we're going to be doing with this. So let's go ahead and start going down the list of everything that we're going to need to import. We have a lot of imports that we need to go through. So let's kind of discuss them as we start adding them in. So obviously we know we're going to be using the UI extension -SDK UI, all those UI elements that we kind of just went over previously. So I know for a fact I'm going to use a box since I am using divs, right? We're going to use the context view, obviously, so we're going to need the top section. I'm going to have buttons that come directly from Stripe. We're going to use their buttons. We're going to have a text field, which is essentially their input field. We're going to have an image because what we're building here is a QR code generator where we can redirect customers, whether they're using payments or something like that. It's just a great use case to kind of understand everything. And we're going to use a library in order to bring those QR codes in, but they're going to come in the form of an image. So we definitely need Stripe's image tool or image component. We have a banner. This can be used for error notifications and things like that. So we know we're going to have that there. Now, I know for a fact I'm going to be using useState with React. So obviously we're going to have useState being there for us. And we're going to have import a QR code generator. We're definitely going to have that there for us. That's going to be the library that we're utilizing. All right, so we know now, obviously, we're going to be on our home page. So this is the home component. So let's go through some of this. We're obviously going to have our URL and set URL. So we're going to have an input field where they enter the URL of where they want to redirect somebody. So we'll have that obviously using state. We are going to have a const QR code and set the QR code. So obviously we'll use state for that, as well as any errors. So if there's an improper URL, we obviously want to display that to the customer and the user so that way, they're not just obviously not seeing what they need to see. So we're going to have a function of generate QR code. We'll have an async function, obviously. And let's go ahead and do a try catch here. So we'll catch any errors, obviously, but we're going to try everything else. So we're obviously going to be checking for URL validation. So go ahead and please enter a URL. And now, obviously, we need URL validation there. So let's use a regex pattern for that. This is a very common regex pattern, nothing special here. So if the URL pattern test is the URL, please enter a valid URL. Set that error there and display that. And how are we going to display that? Using a banner, which we'll have in the return section. Now we're going to await our QR code data for URL from the QR code library. And we're setting the width of our QR code to be 200 and our margin of 2. Now set the QR code to the QR code data URL. And any errors obviously at this point will not be there since nothing is going wrong. Now, what if we need to catch something? So now, obviously, we're going to be debugging this. So let's have the console there so we can kind of see what that error may be. But let's also set the error, and we'll obviously use the banner to kind of display that to the customer. Failed to generate the QR code. Let's try again. So now that we've created our functions, let's go ahead and start returning this stuff so we can actually see something on the front end. So we're going to return. And inside that return, we have that context view. So if you remember, I said at the top layer, what we're going to see. And so we're going to put in our title of URL code generator, our brand colors, and as well as an external link that we're going to go ahead and just redirect to the Stripe docs for now. And we're going to place a box in here inside this context view. And so what does that look like? So we're going to have a box here and we're going to add some styling. So we'll stack it vertically. We're going to have our row gaps of large padding. It's just UI library stuff, similar to like what you would do with maybe Tailwind or the Bootstrap. And we'll generate user payment QR code. So that's what we're going to name this project for the user front side. Now, obviously we have our text field, right? So we're going to have an input field. We'll label this, enter the URL that we want to show the customers, or we want to redirect them to via the QR code. And we'll place a placeholder there for now. And the value will be, of course, URL that we established at the top. Now we're going to place an on change. So we're setting the URL to the target value. And of course, E being each event. And it's going to be the type of URL. So now for our errors, remember we were talking about if there's an error, how we're going to showcase this. We're going to use that banner. And so the type will be critical, which is their UI elements, the title being red, and the description will be the error that we established at the top in that function. Now we're looking at buttons. We're going to do the type of primary. When we press it, we want to run the function of generate QR code. And we're going to disable it if there's no URL. And of course, just hit generate QR code. Now, when we look at setting up that QR code, we're going to have our box in CSS. So, of course, we're stacking it vertically. We're row gap being medium. We're going to obviously align it vertically with center and margin top of large. Now here, we're going to go for your QR code. And we're going to place an image for what the QR code will be in. And the source will obviously be the QR code itself. Generated QR code. And of course, you know, we like having accessible websites and accessible tools. So we'll add our alt text there for the generated QR code. Now we're adding in another button, which will be a type of secondary. When it's pressed, we want to open that QR code into a separate page. So this is basic HTML syntax right there. And of course, we'll label it as download the QR code button. And last but certainly not least, of course, we're going to export our default of home. So if I save that and go back, we still have errors. Why do we have errors? Well, number one being we didn't install this library. So let's go ahead and install that library real fast. Now I used earlier I used command prompt to run the Stripe apps, but I'll use git bash locally. And so we want to go ahead and install QR code. Now theoretically this should work. Oh, and we have problems here because in our manifest and our view files, we are looking at still having the view of customer, even though as of right now, we do not have a file for this. So let's go ahead and remove that. And then now when we look at our manifest and our stripe-app.json file, both only show one view. And so manifest has changed. We need to enable app preview again. And now when we go here, we should see, there it is. Just like that, we have our app. So here we can enter in a URL. Let's go ahead and enter something incorrectly and try to generate a QR code. And now our banner shows up that says, hey, please enter a valid URL. So now let's go ahead and open this .google.com, let's say, and generate the QR code. We have a QR code there. I've got my phone here, so I'm going to go ahead and scan this QR code. And as you can see on the phone, a link has popped up. Will it focus in? A link has popped up, and then if I hit that link, boom, just like that, we're on google.com. So that works. We know that works. But now, if we were to go to the customers page, we wouldn't see anything because that view is gone. So we could create something dynamic where it's like each page we see something else. But just for this situation, let's create something simple. And we could literally just recopy the file. So let's go ahead and copy this. And let's go ahead and create a new file. And we'll call it customers.tsx. And instead of home, we'll replace this with customers. and we'll save it. So after we've created that file, we need to add it to our stripe-app.json file. So if I go back and now add in our dashboard customer.list and we add the component of customers, if we go back now, it'll ask us to, again, enable the app preview. So we'll go back in and relog in since it's a big change to the app. We have our app there. We see it on the home page. We go to the customer page and we see it again. So now it's working in both situations. And so just to test this again, if I go here, our code is generated and we're good to go. Now, obviously, this is a simplistic use case in the grand scheme of things, but if you think about the potential customers that you're tapping into, these are enterprise level organizations, or these are even startups, businesses. You're not having people that are basically trying to watch an ad to get an extra life in a game, right? These are people that are processing transactions. So the solutions you can create for them could be long-term solutions that they keep for a long period of time. I highly recommend checking it out. I've obviously been diving deep into this as of late. And if you need help, we're more than happy to kind of help out. You can email me in any way. You can email me or you can ask this.lab to help out and we can see what we can do for you. And that is this tutorial, and I'll see you on the next one. Goodbye, everybody.